What's up, guys, and welcome back to the Bonsai-En critique series. Now, I know it's been a minute since we've done these. In the months that have passed, I've transitioned to going full-time with bonsai, so that's taken up a lot of my time. And, you know, when you start to transition into a more permanent job in bonsai, you need to really make sure that you're paying the bills and you're doing the things that pay the bills. And unfortunately, YouTube is one of those things that kind of just takes up time but doesn't really pay the bills. So I'm finding myself with a little bit more free time now, coming into going through our autumn season into winter. So I want to try and get a few more of these things done for you guys because I know that you really appreciated them. So we've got some new submissions here, and I've got one submission at the end of this from the previous run that we did because it really wasn't too far away. So hopefully the owner of that tree can still take the advice. But nonetheless, the reason that I wanted to put it in here is because when I looked at the tree, there's actually some really good advice that kind of everybody could take. I think everybody's been in the situation, so we'll put it in there anyway. But our first tree that we got here, we'll get straight into it. This one comes to us from Daniel. It says, "My name is Daniel Fonseca, hope I got that right, from Melbourne. The tree is an Italian cypress, about 1 metre tall when straight. The tree was rescued from a construction site near home, smudged in concrete and with very little foliage. The healthy foliage was still a beautiful green, so I asked permission to dig it out. Put it in a pot using the chopstick trick you showed in your videos and gave it a first rough styling. I know it is a lot of work for how the tree was, but it seems to be doing well. Been doing bonsai since December of 2022 and having lots of fun with it. Cheers, Dan." Well, welcome to the world of bonsai, Dan. This is an addictive hobby, and that'll be one of many trees I'm sure that you have. Now, if we just look through a few of the photos that you've sent in here. So, not a bad little piece of stock. My first advice would be, there's not a ton of options with this stock as to the way you could style it, which is you've obviously gone in the right direction with it, doing somewhat of a literati / bunjin style type tree. So there are a few ways that we could look at going about this. One thing I would suggest is maybe try and grow the tree on a little bit more before you start trying to put it in a bonsai pot, because this situation here is really going to slow all of this down, especially if the tree wasn't in the best health. You're probably better off getting it back into a black nursery can with some organic soil, lots of fertilizer, lots of sunlight, water, that kind of stuff, and building a strong, healthy root ball on the tree, first and foremost, just to get the tree back to some kind of energy positive situation. And this here is not really going to do that for you really quickly because you've got limited space for the roots to grow. I'm not quite sure what soil you have in here. But yeah, that would be my first bit of advice, is from what you've said that it was collected, and it wasn't in the best health to begin with, maybe concentrate on getting the health of the tree in check first. We always want to do that in bonsai. Number one rule, health of the tree comes first. Once the tree's energy positive, super healthy, then we can start doing everything else. But let's take a look at the design anyway, now that we've got that out of the way. As I said, there's not really a lot of options that you can go for here because you haven't got much growth here. A lot of the growth resides in the top half of the tree. So literati bunjin is, probably one of your only styles that you can go for, unless you really wanted to twist and compress this right up. Then you could maybe get this bit of growth here a little bit further down to create an apex, and then you could use the tail to create some kind of a semi-cascade design from there. but this would take quite a lot of, bending, contorting, and I'm not a fan personally of turning a trunk or branches into spaghetti to try and compress them to, force the tree into something else. So I would probably stick with a literati design. But the first bit of advice I would give you for doing a literati design is try and avoid this kind of bending here. So let me just get this. So this kind of bend here, it's very, very subtle and very soft, okay? This just here. And this is what we would call a lazy bend or a teacup handle. Now, when we say lazy bend, we're not saying that the artist was lazy. But what we mean is it's very gentle. It's not very aggressive. It's very lazy, let's just say. So that's what we call a lazy bend, and it doesn't look real good. So if we're going for a literati or bunjin design, I would try and concentrate on maybe putting some movement in this main trunk. So it doesn't have to be, I'm not talking about, massive S moves like this. It can be, very subtle, kind of movement as such, something like that. So a little bit more of a aggressive bend here and then some light stuff up towards the top. And then you can somewhat use the growth that you've got and keep growing it on. So this is where putting it back into a nursery can, putting it back into a bigger nursery can and giving it that room to grow. And then that way it'll thicken up a little bit too into its design. And then as it goes up, you could get some taper into it, kind of like so. And then you could concentrate on, growing these branches out that you've got here. So you've got, a little more to work with. And then you can, really get aggressive with your branches and start bringing them back down, with your bunjin kind of design, if that makes sense. I do have some stuff here that I got off Google for you, just to give you an idea. So you can see with this one here, and I know this is a pine, but the design still counts. So you can see there's not a ton of growth on this tree, and the pads are only really little and understated, but that's kind of this design, the whole literati and bunjin type of thing. But you can see here how this movement that is in this trunk, it's not super aggressive. It's quite light. And then you can just put some, pads out here. You want some stuff out the back, some stuff out the front here, and then a little apex up the top here. Quite nice. And then we've got another one here that I got. This is kind of a different thing again. So once again, you can see not a ton of movement in the trunk. So not having a lot of, where was the one we were looking at? This one here. So you can see that your trunk here, just because there's no movement in it, it doesn't mean you can't put a little bit of movement in it. Like this one, you can see, doesn't have to be aggressive. And then right at the top, there is an aggressive bend up here. So rather than doing that lazy bend or that teacup handle, they've gone for a really aggressive bend. But if you wanted to, you could cut back to some of this growth. Not right now, because you'll probably kill the tree. Once the tree's super healthy, energy positive, and once one of these branches becomes really strong, you could wire it back now so it's got a really acute angle, and then later on, once it's really grown on, you could achieve something very similar to this design here. And you can see that very minimal foliage. You've basically got an apex and a little, you've got an apex and a little sub branch here. So, just because you haven't got a lot to work with, it doesn't mean you can't create something nice. This is quite nice. This is very elegant. I would say it's in the wrong side of the pot. If I started to do a critique on this person's tree, I would have had this planted over here. But yeah, really, really quite nice, understated design. And, same with this one. You could achieve either of these with your tree. But like I said with this one, first thing to do is get this thing back to health by putting it in a growing container, giving it plenty of fertilizer, sunlight, getting that root ball nice and strong again, letting all this growth flush out, get really quite dense and healthy, and then you can come back and start to doing some of that stuff. But once again, welcome to the world of bonsai, and I hope you have a lot of fun with it. Let's have a look at the next tree. Alright, so we've got our next tree here, so let me just pull up the notes. So it says, "Hi Josh, I'm Jason from Charlottesville, Virginia in the US, where it is early spring and my first bonsai has been slip potted into a growing container and being fertilized for the growth season. I've been watching all your content on YouTube and learning everything I can from you about bonsai. My mindset for this tree is both short and long term regarding growth/flushing, pruning, wiring and refining to change the style of my juniper. I have it in a black growing pot with Espoma organic soil, slow release 10-10-10 granular fertilizer, and watering is needed. This tree lives outdoors and gets 6 to 8 hours of sunlight on the back patio daily. I'll follow your teaching and recommendations for growth, thickening, elongation and refining over the next several years. I'm a patient man, but I wonder how many years of growth and flushing are necessary until I refine." Alright, let's take a look. So we'll just have a flick through the photos that have been sent here. Very healthy. And then we've got some sketched out ideas of what Jason is going for. Definitely a much better drawer than I am, that's for sure. Alright. So this is a pretty common site for junipers, at least anyway. This is just the natural way that these grow. They are a prostrating tree, kind of a ground cover, so they will always go up first and then they just naturally want to go down like this. So a lot of the stock that we do see does have this curve in it. And this is where it can kind of, throw people's ideas off a little bit of what they can do with this tree, because, you look at this and think, okay, well, it has to be semi-cascade or whatever it is. But you can do quite a lot more with this design, in my opinion. So, especially if I was to look at it from this point of view here. So I would keep obviously growing it and slip potting it, because you're going to want this trunk to thicken up and you're going to want it to mature, because from the first photo you can see this really smooth bark look in here that you get on young junipers. What you want is you want it to start plating up, and you can see that within here it's still really smooth. So the older the tree gets and the more you grow it, the more it will plate up and get that corky look. But also you want it to get a little bit thicker too. The good thing though is these trees do grow quite well and quite quickly. I'm not sure what your growing season's like where you are. I can only talk for myself here. We have 9 solid months of growing season, so our junipers absolutely pump for 9 months. So obviously keeping as much growth on the tree as you can is going to help you out. Keeping up with your fertilizer, and like you said, it gets 6 to 8 hours sun a day, which is perfect. So you keep those things up and you're going to get the maximum amount of growth that you can out of your growing season anyway. The pruning that I would do on this tree is making sure that, so if you're coming into spring now, you're getting all these little fleshy new tips, don't cut them off, let them flush, let them harden off, okay? They're going to be, once they harden off, they're going to be almost photosynthetic growth on the tree, so they're going to be the most efficient growth. So definitely don't cut them off. But what you are going to want to do is, as you get close to the summertime, you're going to want to clear out some of the growth so you can basically see through the tree, right through to the trunk and through to the branches, because you're going to want that airflow coming through and you're going to want the sunlight to get in there so you can get back budding in the future. We always want to keep the tree back budding. We don't want it to get long and leggy, which you see with a lot of junipers where they end up with these super long branches. They end up with these really long branches with a lot of growth out here, but really nothing along here. And this is usually from a tree that this part of the branch has been shaded for so long that it really doesn't actively backbud anymore. So if we can keep this actively backbudding over the years, even though we're not going to use those buds now, we just want to make sure we keep that tree doing that process. So by keeping it open to the air, open to the light, you'll get that. Now the next thing that I would do, I probably wouldn't go semi-cascade with this. I would make a cut here. Okay, get rid of this. And then essentially what this becomes now is a branch. You might even be able to cut it up a little bit further. So essentially what you would have is your main trunk line that would come up here, and then it would come down here. But what you could do is one of your little shoots up in here, let's just say this guy here for example, you could wire this up as your new leader. So you've got this here that you could have as a branch here. Now you could use this as another branch, and then you could continue the tree's growth up and potentially get another branch up here and grow it out like that. I would also too, while this tree is still young and somewhat pliable, I can see that there's somewhat of a tiny little curve here, but I would try and get some kind of bend just here. I wouldn't do it now in the springtime. I would wait until your autumn period, because you're bending such a, well, this is not a super large piece of material, but compared to the rest of what's on the tree, and for somebody who's just starting out, this would be a larger bend. So I'll wait till the autumn time, because that's when it's going to be most forgiving. But I'd chuck some thick wire on here and really just try and accentuate that bend a bit more. That way when you come back up here and then you end up with this branch down here, which is what this would be, and then your new leader, and then you could end up having a really nice formation like that. So there's a lot of movement in the tree. And eventually what you could do is go with a harmonious design. So you can see that the angle is first coming this way. So that means this would be your defining branch, okay? Which it's going to be the most dominant branch on the tree anyway. But this one here, you're still going to want this branch to be the thickest. So what you're going to want to do is really let this grow right out, okay? And then as it becomes thick, then you can come back in and cut it back again. But always make sure that there's growth behind that cut, otherwise the branch will die off. So you're going to want this to be the thickest, but this will be your defining branch. And by defining branch, I mean we have harmonious and tension designs in trees. So because the first movement in the tree is going this direction, if we have your defining branch, so the branch on the tree that gives the most direction, which would be this one, okay, going that way, and then when you built your apex, you would have your longer side here and your shorter side here, which would then give you harmonious design the whole way across the tree. So if I was looking for a future for this tree, that's exactly what I would be looking for in terms of what I'm going to do. So you can see here again, you would make the cut there somewhere like that, try and put a bend in here like this, have that come through to that branch, take one of these, wire it up as a new leader and let it grow, have this branch down here, and that would be the base of your tree. Now I know you did have the question as well of kind of how many years you were looking at before you could refine the tree. And really that's going to come down to one, how often and how well you stay on top of the outlined work. So the keeping it in the sun, keeping it fertilized, keeping as much growth on the tree as you possibly can, keeping the new growth on, that's the most photosynthetically efficient. doing your summer pruning to open up the tree a little bit more on the inside. I mean, the tree, junipers will do it anyway. All this stuff on the interior will go brown and just drop off the tree, but you can get in there and do that beforehand. You keep on top of all that stuff. If you've got, let's just say, a 6-month growing season, you could be looking at refining this tree in maybe 5 to 6 years. Once you've got, a much thicker base. So at the moment you can see this tree is probably, only this thick. You would probably want it, at least somewhere out here. And that would probably be to a minimum, just to give it, a nice, because it's a conifer, they usually fall into that masculine kind of design, so you want a bit more of a girthier trunk. You can have more feminine junipers, but you're looking at more of those Bonsai-En, windswept, literati kind of designs where you have a thinner, taller, more drawn out trunk. But I think that's probably it for now. Keep slip potting this tree, keep up with all the work. That's just what I would do with this tree. And I would point out too, the reason I probably wouldn't go semi-cascade with this tree is because by the time it comes over to the semi-cascade, it's really tall and then drops back down, which is not that nice. You would probably want something that's more like this, with your apex here and then, all your pads kind of going down from there. So that's why I would probably go with the more of the upright design anyway. And, there's not a lot of movement in this little section. So with the outline design, all you would have to do is put a really gentle curve in it this way. And then by the time it comes back to this curve here, you can make use of that, cut it off there, and then go from there. But I hope that's helped you out, Jason. Let's move on to the next tree. Alright, so we got our next tree here. Let's bring up the notes. It says, "Hi Josh, got a weird one for you. I've attached 6 images, one in the front in the box, one in the proposed front after styling, then the others required. So a bit of information. I'm Xander, and this is one of my collected field maples. The tree itself is in its 2nd season from collection. Grew strong from a stump essentially last year, which is all the growth you see, and is budding out very strong this year. Now it's been transitioned into the inorganic soil. Many, many new options. I've got a couple of ideas of how to style it this coming fall and would like to know what you would do. Would you carve the stump into something of interest or cut back and try to heal? I look forward to hearing your views if this tree is considered for the critique. I have a few other trees, but I'll wait until a future one to submit. This one's got me a little stumped." Alright, so let's just have a quick flick through these photos here. So I'm guessing this is one of these two is probably his proposed front after styling. And then we've just got some from the side and the back and the other side. Okay, so we definitely do get a lot more interest and movement from this side. I'd like to see a little bit more of what the root base is actually doing down here. It looks like it's got something dead just here. But it does look like this root's coming this way, but doesn't look like there's much over here. Whereas on this front, it's kind of here and you've got something here. So that kind of makes it look a little bit more stable. So this would probably be my proposed front rather than this one, just because of this. And this has a little bit of a feeling like the tree's leaning and falling this way. But let's just go with this anyway. One of the first things I notice is there's, not a lot of taper in this. But the other thing is it's quite thick too. So, as a tree gets thicker, we kind of want it to get a little bit shorter. It just looks a lot nicer in proportion. So one of the first things that I would probably do with this tree is come in and make an angled cut, probably about here somewhere. It could be something like that. It gives you a little bit of taper. gets rid of this, and then it just gives you this, base to work with here. And given that it's a maple, these aren't required to have a ton of movement. They look quite nice with very minimal movement in them. But it's going to be very basic from there. So once this is chopped like this, you're really going to want to just let this tree flush out and get really as many options for growth as you possibly can. One of these, new little bits of growth that you've got on here, something like this guy back here. Let me change this so you can see it a little bit better. So this little guy here, once you do that cut on that other side, you could actually wire this up as a new leader, something like that. You've got a branch here right on the outside of the curve, which you could grow that on as a nice branch. But yeah, really quite simple with this tree at the moment. I would do that cut, get that angle on it, okay? That tapers it off a little bit towards the top. Gets rid of this kind of elongated look on the tree anyway. And I mean, this is, if you really wanted to keep something like this, you could have a design that would be more suited to like a juniper or something, where you've got the apex out here and it's really, leaning in one direction. That would be up to you. But if it were my tree, I would probably cut it here, let all this grow out really thick and strong. That way you can come back in and choose a couple of main branches around the tree, wire up a new leader, and just have that really quite classic Japanese maple look. Alright, so I've just gone on to Google and quickly grabbed an image of a maple. I know yours is a field maple, but this is what I'm talking about with, you can see it's thick, it's quite short, and this one would have been cut just here. You can somewhat see that cut through there. So if I get my drawing tool here, I might make this a little bit smaller. You can see the trunk kind of comes up here, and then it kind of gets chopped off like that. And then they've, got their branches all out here like this, and then they've obviously made a new leader up into here, which is the same kind of thing that I'm suggesting for your tree here. It's just around the opposite way. So you can get that up there like that. And then you get that classic just maple look where there's not a lot of movement in the trunk. It's really quite elegant, but you build this big, nice canopy around here and the ramification on the branches. So quite a long way to go for this, but that's the first steps that I'd be taking, doing that cut, growing up one of the branches, probably this one here, trying to get that up as a new leader, unless you can get something to pop here. Chances are when you do that cut just here, you're going to get buds from around the site, so you may get something that comes up right here for you if you're lucky enough. But do that chop first, let the tree recover, grow, and then you'll have plenty of options to look at in the future. But this would be my vision for your tree in the future. But let's move on to our next tree. Alright, so this is the tree that I said that was submitted for our last run of the critique series that I didn't quite get around to, but there'd be quite a lot of good information for this anyway. So let me just bring up the notes for this one. It says, "Hi guys, my name is Michael Taylor. I live in Bayswater, Western Australia. I'm a bonsai enthusiast, but I'm an absolute beginner. Forgive me for the photos. I did not have anything large enough for the background. I sincerely hope you can use them. The tree I've attached is a Japanese black pine, which I grew from seed. I'm unsure of its age, however, but I'd say it's 7 to 10 years old. I grew it in the hopes of creating a bonsai. However, I had no idea where to start and left it alone. It started to candle, and I think for the first time it's flowered, which I'm not opposed to, as I hope to have pine cones and seed. I'm absolutely lost on what to do. I asked a bonsai expert and they said it's too late to really do anything with it. He said, Japanese black pine do not backbud. I did notice it had at least one backbud on one branch, however. If I cannot use it for bonsai, I will most likely plant it and let it grow. Perhaps try Nawaki. I would appreciate any help at all. Alright, so as you can see, a Japanese black pine that looks pretty much like any Japanese black pine that's just been grown as stock. Really quite common, this. So the first thing that I would point out is saying that it's too late to do anything with this tree. I have to disagree with that, because this is how a lot of stock is grown. It's just grown untouched. There are some people who do the work along the way, but a lot of the stock that you'll pick up will look like this. So, it's not really too late. Also, saying that Japanese black pine don't backbud, I would also have to disagree with that. You can make Japanese black pine backbud quite readily, but I will say it is harder in this situation. So what makes it harder in this situation? What makes it harder in this situation is the fact that there's no needles along these branches here. So along here you can see they're quite bare in close. And this is usually a mistake of needle plucking. So needle plucking is very important for Japanese black pine, because as we know, the top up here will get really strong, and all this stuff down here that we likely want to work with later on will get weak and start to die off. So what we need to do is match the amount of needles up here with roughly what's down on the bottom. But what people usually do is they'll pluck all the way out to the end and just leave all the foliage out here. Now, on a Japanese black pine, you're much, much, much more likely to get a bud from a set of needles than you are just from the bare wood. So what I suggest people do is when they needle pluck, they leave needles in here nice and close to the trunk for later on, so you get buds in here nice and close. So what you can do is, I usually tell people on a branch is, if I just draw a quick little diagram here. So say this is our branch, just looking at it from the side horizontally. So you would have needles coming from the top, and you would have needles coming from the bottom, okay? And then you would also have your sets of needles running laterally along the side of the branch. So a branch like this, if I was to needle pluck it, the first thing that I would do is I'd come in and, hang on, let me just, actually, my bad. So what I would do is I would come in and I'd actually remove all these needles off the top and off the bottom. And I would keep all the ones that were running laterally along the side of the branch. Because we don't want branches necessarily that are going up, and we don't want branches that are coming down. We want branches that are going laterally side to side. So we can get rid of all those needles across the top, okay, across here, get rid of all those needles, and get rid of all the needles across the bottom, leave all the needles running along the side. So we've already removed some needles, so we've done some needle plucking essentially, okay. And this is going to be mainly for the top half of the tree that you're doing this. But down the bottom, you always want to leave needles closer to the trunk. That way you can have that higher chance of the backbiting. Now, what happens in this situation where we don't have any needles in here, we currently don't have any buds? How do we get this? Okay, one, we need to make the tree really, really strong, okay? So really fertilize this thing heavily, give it plenty of sun, just get it super, super healthy. And then what I would suggest you do is start cutting this tree back a little bit slowly, okay? So I would start probably, even this season, it looks like it's got some strong growth. So I would come in and just chop that off right there. Because really, when you start working on this as a bonsai, your options are either going to be have this and then new leader here, and then wire that up and do something, or you're going to come right back down into here and, you know, have a really short little stumpy tree. So either way, that means that you can do this cut now and just get rid of all this up here. And if the tree is healthy enough, that might actually start to encourage some back budding in the tree. What I would do then is next year I would let all these candles grow out, you know, get really strong, and then slowly start cutting so see this branch here and this one here that are coming off here, these little branches here, I would let these get really strong, okay? So you can somewhat see that you've got a bunch of candles in here. Next season, these are all going to extend out. They're all going to get needles on them. Let them get really strong. Then once they're really strong, you can come in here and once again cut all this off. And you may encourage back budding back here. But what that's also going to do is these little ones that are in here, that'll encourage these to get stronger. And then you can do that same thing again. Let these get stronger and you may encourage back budding back here. And you can see how we're just slowly over time starting to push back in closer to the trunk. And that's really the only option with this kind of Japanese black pine, where you're very limited that you've got no needles kind of back closer in. You can see the pollen cones here, okay? But I would say not to give up on this tree. You know, most of this tree here you're not going to use anyway. As I said, this maximum, this is your tree in here anyway. I would probably aim to have your tree within here anyway. So if you were going to start working on this now, you know, the shorter you can get it, the more in proportion it's going to be to this kind of thickness of the trunk that you've got. So I would concentrate on this anyway. One thing that I would look at for now though is, see this situation you've got going on here where you've got a whole bunch coming from one section. You're going to need to start to reduce that, because if not, you're just going to get major swelling in that area if there isn't already. Doesn't look like there's much swelling here now, but I would maybe, you know, get rid of something like this and make your choices. And once again, you know, I've pointed this branch out and the work to do on it, but you can do it on any of these branches. It doesn't necessarily have to be this one. Where's that other photo with them all coming out? Yeah. So you could do that work on this branch, or you could do that work on this branch or this branch. Whichever one that you think that you want for your design, you can do that same work on. You know, this branch here is really quite strong, this one here. So maybe you could go with that one. You know, let that get strong. You know, cut the center out of it. Let the stuff behind it, this get strong. Once that gets strong enough, cut that back there. Hopefully some stuff behind here starts to bud back, starts to get stronger. As these start to get much stronger, you know, then you can cut back to here. And you can see how we're slowly just gaining strength, cutting back, gaining strength, cutting back, gaining strength, cutting back. But that would be your option for this tree moving forward. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this little episode of the critique series. As I start to get some more submissions, I'll leave a link down in the description below if you would like to submit your tree for this. Please do keep in mind, this is just what I would do. You don't have to follow any of these. You don't have to take my advice at all. You may learn from somebody else something different and you may want to take their advice. That's fine. But we just do these critique things just as what I would do if this was my tree. So anyway, hope you enjoyed the episode. Click the link down in the description and submit your trees, and we'll do another episode soon when we have some more submissions.